The Apple Macintosh IIci. I've been working on this machine for the past couple of weeks and it's been driving me nuts because I can't fix it. I picked this up a while back from RMC's Discord. A user on there by the name of Mike J. He did have a go at fixing this. It had suffered really bad battery corrosion. He couldn't get it going and offered it for the low price of postage only. I couldn't say no to an offer like that, so I dropped him a few pounds. He sent this my way. And while I did give it my best shot, as you'll see in the forthcoming video, I unfortunately cannot get this thing to go. So it is quite a long video. This actually isn't the original intro to it. I did have another intro all recorded, ready to go. In fact, the whole video is edited and ready to be uploaded. But I decided last minute to just re-record this intro to explain from the outset that I can't get this thing to go. We do make some progress with it though. I mean, it's not just totally dead. But what I would ask is that anyone who is familiar with these things that may be watching this, if you see anything that I did wrong during the course of the video, or anything I missed, or if you can have any recommendations for something else to try, well, please let me know. We start the video with a bit of a tour around the machine, and we take the board out and do what we can to repair the damage. It's certainly taken a bit of yellowing, hasn't it? You can see there where the tide has very much came in, just along the top here. Must have been a big monitor sat here once upon a time. The case has taken a bit of a knock. We do have a little bit missing here from the top corner, and down in here, well, you can see a bit of damage there, almost as if it's been dropped once upon a time and this is where it landed. So if indeed from an impact, I hope whatever caused that hasn't also damaged the hard drive which lives in here. There's the 3.5-inch floppy drive. You won't be able to see it on the video, but I can see rust in there. 2 LEDs, presumably power and drive access. And then over here, just below the badge, we seem to be missing something. 2 holes disappearing into the case. Did we once have a power switch and a reset switch here? I suppose we'll find out better when we take it apart. This side is just blank. We have one big slab of yellowed plastic. But on this side, well, I thought this was interesting. 4 holes. And I was racking my brain trying to think what they might be for. But I think the intention of these is so that you can install this vertically. Because if you look on the bottom of the case, there are 4 feet. And they each seem to have a single bit of rubber protruding through into the case. You can see the same sort of little ridge beside the hole where those feet attach. And so my guess would be that those are designed to come off and fit into those holes instead, so that you can have your Macintosh IIci sitting on your desktop like this. Did anyone have their Mac IIci set up vertically like this back in the day? If you did, let me know. The back of the case then is where all the action is. Room for 3 expansion cards. Must have been something in here once upon a time, but has since been removed. Might try and 3D print something to cover that port. Speaking of ports, we get 2 Apple desktop bus or Apple data bus ADB ports, let's just call them that. Audio output, modem, printer, Apple 15-pin display port, external SCSI and external floppy drive, power supply input and pass through to a monitor. Getting into the case is really easy. There should be 1 screw here which we are missing, but after that's removed, just these 2 tabs lift up and the top cover removes. But unfortunately for us, this is where the problems start. So it doesn't look too bad just at the minute. although the top of the Quantum SCSI hard drive, well, I dare say the previous owner has been inside here because somebody has removed that screw in the past, and these other screw heads, they look as if they've been damaged. So possibly one dead hard drive, although given the extent of corrosion in this side of the board underneath here, and in particular the extent of corrosion suffered to the floppy drive that sits underneath this drive, well, I would say there's every likelihood that this drive was dead anyway. We do have 4 memory sticks installed with space for a further 4. If I had to guess, 1 megabyte of RAM total. Space here for another memory module. Would that be for display memory? Did some of these Macs have separate display memory? Do you have another expansion slot here? That may be for the cache RAM expansion. And then if I turn this around just so you can see it better, there's the other 3 Apple expansion ports. This board has the Motorola 68882 FPU on board. Back in 1990 when this machine was new, that must have seemed like a rather nice addition to the specification. The CPU itself, the 68030, well, it's on the board up in there underneath all of this stuff, and in this machine it's clocked at 25 megahertz. So there's not much point in just talking about it. Let's strip it down so that we can have a look at the damage. We can easily unplug the power and the SCSI ribbon cable going to the hard drive, and then the drive itself should just lift out. As I said, our drive is a Quantum unit, 80 megabyte drive, and as you can maybe tell by the discoloration in the metalwork on this, it has suffered quite a bit of battery corrosion. We will have a go though to see if we can get it to spin, but not just yet. I want to continue stripping down the machine. The next thing to come out is the power supply, and then this is going to be hard to get a clear shot of, but this large bit of plastic here in which the drive was originally installed, this also carries the floppy drive, but down in there at the very bottom of it there's a clip, so you need to sort of put your hand in underneath the power supply. You can lever that clip out of the way and that releases the PSU. Now there's no cables coming out of this to the motherboard, rather this plugs directly into the board, so it's just a matter then of wrestling this out. And there it comes. There's a connector block there on it, and that was plugged in just there. There is our 68030 CPU. To remove this plastic tray here which carries the 2 drives, just need to remove this one screw. This should just then lift out. Well, it would if we remembered to disconnect the floppy drive first. Look at the state of that. We'll come back to that, and that reveals the nightmare that we are dealing with. Just remove these other 2 cables, and then to take the motherboard itself out, we just need to remove the speaker. Just pulling up on that tab there removes it, and with that out of the way, the motherboard should slide forward and lift out. And so here it is, our Apple IIci motherboard. There was a battery here once upon a time, and you can see what happens when a battery leaks. It has made an absolute mess of this. The underside of the board isn't as bad, but you can see plenty of dull solder points, although I would hope down here we don't have just as many broken traces. Speaking of which, of course, you can see that somebody has had a go, and that would be Mike, the previous owner of this board. He did his best, but wasn't able to get it working. So let's see if we can finish off what he has started. I think the first thing that we need to do, to be honest with you, is just remove any of the repair work that Mike has tried. We'll take off all these wires that he's fitted, and I think we'll need to remove at least that one ROM chip. In fact, looking at the state of it, I would say that capacitor, the real-time clock chip, those two small components below it, and the real-time clock crystal, that should probably come off as well. In fact, the other thing is the main clock crystal. That's it there. 28.37516 megahertz. That is the wrong part that Mike fitted. He told me that the original crystal that was there was just toast. I would well believe him, given the state of the rest of this. But that is meant to be a 50 megahertz part. I had some of those sent my way recently, and so we can remove that and fit the proper part in its place. But yeah, first thing to do is just remove all of this, then we can start the cleanup process. Just before I do start into this though, I was having a quick look around the rest of the board. Our corrosion is not limited to this area. One thing that Mike said to me was that he recapped the board, and yes, we can see new electrolytics fitted more or less everywhere. Not sure if these are new though, but you can see a little bit of hairiness in and around both these areas. Just here, for example, beside these three capacitors, the VIA chip here, you can see the legs of it are quite green. Indeed, just below those capacitors as well, there's a few bits of 7-4 logic. The legs of them are a bit green, as are those couple of transistors, and there's some damage to a fairly large trace just in there as well. That middle capacitor, C12, it is only connected to the board on one side. So I think what we'll do as part of our repair work here is just remove the capacitors that Mike had fitted, just so we can inspect in these areas better as well. It's the same story on this other side of the board. This is the audio stuff around where these capacitors were. The originals obviously had leaked, and you can see a little bit of corrosion on several of these components. Definitely not as bad this end of the board, but I think we will just remove those couple of caps and make sure that this whole area is cleaned up properly. So we do certainly have our work cut out for us. First thing to do is let's just remove everything that needs to be removed. Can't get any new solder to flow onto the points of that ROM that we need to remove, so I'm going to try and go over it first with the fiberglass pen to try and get what corrosion I can off it, and then hopefully we can flow some fresh solder onto it, and then the desoldering station will let us remove it. But it's not looking too promising. Yeah, there is no new solder taking to that at all. Let's just try it with the desoldering station, see if the thermal mass of that would be enough to melt the crusty solder that is on here. And yeah, it removed a good bit of it there. And I think it blocked itself in the process. Oh, this gun can be annoying at the best of times. And when it's presented with corroded solder like that, it just loves to block itself. So I think it's just going to be a matter of sucking up what I can with this. Then we'll flow some fresh solder into it and try to suck it all up again, and hopefully that will free up the chip. It's blocked again. Well, that took forever, but as you can see, I decided to remove all 4 of the ROM chips. This one at the end, this was by far the worst. Now that we have it out, the damage here is significant. But the other 3 chips, they all had signs of corrosion on them. There are an awful lot of traces coming from these, so easier to just remove it, then we can inspect it. I'm going to fit sockets here before we put the ROM chips back in. You can see I've also removed the crystal. That had to come off anyway because it was the wrong one. And the clock crystal, it has also been removed. So the next thing to do is to remove the surface mounted stuff. Real-time clock chip, 2 diodes and this capacitor. I might remove this resistor pack, I'm not sure. If we can clean it up in position, it might just do. But these components definitely do need to come off. Now, given just how difficult it was to remove the ROM chips, I'm going to try and clean some of this up before we attempt to remove these. I have the board here sitting on a bit of kitchen roll, and that's because it's just about to get a bath in white vinegar, or certainly this area is anyway. So I'm just going to work that into these components here with the toothbrush. In fact, let's just coat this whole area in it, will we, because the corrosion here is significant. And then we're going to leave that there for a few minutes to try and eat its way into some of that corrosion. Then we'll come back, rinse it off with some IPA. Right, that's been on there for about 5 minutes or so. Let's just take our bit of kitchen roll and dab down what we can, and then soak the thing in IPA. That's all dried up, so I just want to try and hit the solder points with the fiberglass pen. See if I can get them to come up at all. Really, all I'm doing this for is to try and make my life easier when removing these components. I don't have replacements for these, so I'd rather not break them. I don't think there's going to be any need to remove that resistor pack. Just going over that gently there with the fiberglass pen, and the solder points on it are coming up okay. But these definitely do need to come off. So after cleaning them up like that, we'll hit them with a little bit of flux. And then let's see if we can flow any fresh solder into it. Ideally, if we can mix even just a little bit of fresh solder in here, it hopefully will help the removal process. I'm not really worried if we have any blobs of solder at the minute. This whole area is going to look a lot worse before it starts looking any better. But now that we've done that, let's just see if we can get these off with a bit of hot air. Well, D7 and D8 are off, but we've lost a leg on D7 in the process. Probably need to order some replacements. At least the real-time clock chip looks as if it came off without any damage. Just this capacitor then. And that's that free as well. We can then hopefully tidy this up a bit with some braid. That is just a crusty mess. I don't know how we're going to tidy that up. Oh, I said earlier while looking at the front of the case that there was an LED at the bottom. Yeah, I do think there used to be an LED just here, but it's long since gone. So if we do manage somehow to get this working, that's something that we'll need to fit again. But that's about as good as I can get that for the minute. I'm going to try and clean up what we have here, just with a bit of IPA and cotton buds. And then we can start to assess the damage. Pads around that cleaned up not too bad actually.
Doesn't look like there's anything damaged just here, but it definitely needed to come off to clean it up properly. And believe it or not, but those two diodes, for the state of them, they seem to work fine. And even though we did lose a leg on D7 here from this position, well, that pod is actually not used in the signaling. That's just there to hold the component. The diode only operates between that point and that point. So I dare say we could just put those two original parts back on there. As for the rest of this, well, I need to spend some time with the fiberglass pen. May need to bring out the wire brush pen as well, because I now want to try and get all the solder mask off everything in this area so that we can start looking for breaks and start making repairs. Well, it is quite a few hours later. I've exposed all the copper here so that we can get a better look at the damage. I've done the underside of the board as well, just in this area, and the damage is very extensive. We can get a better look at this in a minute on the computer. I've taken a couple of high resolution photos of it so we can zoom right in to see where the damage is. But basically everything on this side of that ROM chip, all of that needs to be repaired. All the little vias in this sort of area, they are all toast. They'll all need to be repaired. In fact, there's some traces in this point here just missing altogether. What's that edge connector for? Because that doesn't connect to anything inside the case. At least I don't think it does. So with all that to take care of, but also on the underside, well, it didn't quite get away with it. There is quite a bit of damage here. There are multiple breaks in these three traces that run up this direction. But also from the underside of that ROM chip, from this side of it, all those traces coming this way, all of those are broken as well. And that's not even taking into consideration any damage in this area or this area. Remember, we looked at those earlier, and there's lots of green nastiness up here, which I'm attributing not so much to the battery leakage, but rather to the original caps that were here. They had obviously leaked. So I am expecting to find other trace damage in these areas as well. To be honest with you, I am starting to wonder if it's even worth continuing. I think before we do bother starting any repairs down here, what I'll do is take a look in these areas just to see if I can find anything broken. Hopefully up here it just looks bad. It's just surface corrosion, and if we clean all that off, well, it will be fine underneath. So we'll just do the same here that we did down below. Let's start with a bath of white vinegar. I just did that other side as well. But vinegar was left on it there for a few minutes. I've dried off most of it. And now let's just go over it again with the IPA. And then once that's dried off, or well, more or less dried off, you can still see a bit of grain there on the likes of that chip. So just going to go over it with the fiberglass pen. Well, a bit of good news for a change. I didn't find anything broken up here. Although while poking around, I did manage to knock off that capacitor. That one. So before we leave this area, let's just stick that cap back on, and some of the other solder work that was done previously here, it could use tidied up a wee bit, so we'll just reflow some of that. And I know I said earlier I was going to take all this off and redo it, but thinking about it, I mean, what's the point really? I've tested all the pods from the capacitors that were fitted, and everything tests out okay. So if we do somehow manage to get this board to boot, I may come back and revisit this again, but for now, I think I'd be happy enough just to leave well enough alone. So I'm happy enough with this end of the board here now. But what about the damage down here? Just how bad is it really? So on this photo of the top side of the board, I have drawn on everywhere that I think we need to run patch wires. And yeah, as you can see, the damage is quite extensive. we have an awful lot of patchwork to do. One point there where the crystal connects, well, the via at that point, or the through hole at that point, it's quite badly damaged, so we'll need to do some repair work to that. Little break in the trace there, you would hardly see it, but definitely broken, so that needs to be patched. Coming off this side of the ROM, the majority of them, the traces are just disconnected where they connect to the hole, but there are a few where the traces are significantly damaged and the connections need to be made further back up. This one here, for example, there are quite a few breaks in that trace the whole way up here. We're going to have to connect it off at that point. These three traces here, well, on the board, they're just gone, completely gone. So it will be running wires from that point, and those 2 points need to take something on down there as well, don't they? Well, it'll be running wires from there. We'll just stick the wires through the board here at this point to make off on the other side, but that one will have to come up and be made off up here. There's one point here through the board, it doesn't seem to connect to anything on either side. So I'll put a question mark against it. We'll maybe just try and flow some fresh solder into it. You can see around it though, the board looks as if it has delaminated slightly. So I'm not really sure what the purpose of that is, but hopefully it's just not required. This big large trace coming down here, well, that's obviously split away from its hole. So we need to make a patch there. And obviously then where the battery connected, we'll need to do something with that, because we most likely will need to fit a new battery in here to get this board to boot. Lots of repair work required in this bottom corner. Traces from these points on this edge connector, well, they're just completely gone. As I said, I don't really know what this edge connector is doing, if anything, although it does seem to be routing signaling from the top side of the board through to the bottom side, so we will need to repair it in any case. Speaking of the bottom side, well, it doesn't really fare any better, to be honest. Maybe just not as much in terms of repair work, but there is still quite a bit to do. The underside of the ROM, all of those traces there where I have drawn the red lines, they have came away from the hole beside them. Although I think all I'll do here is when we fit the socket, we'll just bend the leg of the socket down onto the trace, and we can make good that way. This area here, well, this is one area of concern, to be honest. We do need to fix all those traces as I've drawn. Those two components there, they are resistors, and I can read them out on the multimeter, they're fine. These two components, I have no idea what they are. They're open circuit on the multimeter. Can't really see it in this photo because it's a bit washed out, but they have like a green coating on the top of them. So if they are meant to be resistors, well, they're damaged. And unfortunately the identification for them on the silk screen, it is long since gone. So I don't know what these are. I suppose they might be capacitors, but then again, those are capacitors and they look nothing like that. Repair needs to be made there. These traces coming up here, they're in awful condition. I don't know how this happened, because I wouldn't have expected the battery corrosion to get to here. But nevertheless, they're wrecked. So from those 2 points there, and following this one down to this point here, we need to run wires from there. And I'm just going to completely bypass those traces, taking them up to these 3 vias here. And then there's 2 traces there that also need to be repaired. Just notice that there might be damage there at that point. I'll need to buzz that out, but that is one other potential point that needs fixed. And that is going to be the problem with this board, isn't it? There is so much potential damage on the bottom of this and on the top. It's just making sure that we find it all. But no time like the present, so let's just get stuck in, shall we? So I'm not going to do all of this on camera because, you know, this video would be hours long. It already is quite long, isn't it? But let's make a start on the ROM. May as well start down here. Now we don't need to do anything at pin 1, but at pin 2, well, we do need to run a wire from there up through the board at this point. That's where the original trace went through. That is that point there. And then you can see where that original trace was, it is also quite badly broken. It's that middle trace out of the 3. I think that's the last break in it there. And it runs through to that point there. And that is where I think it would be easiest to make our wire off onto. So I'm going to be using this wrapping wire to do the repair with. We'll feed that through the hole on the board here, where the via was once upon a time. We'll try to more or less follow the route of the existing trace. And that needs to be connected off there. That's just loose at the minute, but I will tack it down with a bit of hot glue once we're finished. And I say once we're finished because I do need to bring more wires through to connect off to those 2 other points as well. And I just noticed there that I have created a small bridge on the board, so let me see if I can fix that. There, that's better. But that wire is ultimately going to wind its way down and connect off at pin 2 on that socket. So we'll just stick that through there for now, just leave plenty of length on it. No point in soldering that up yet until I get the socket installed. I've done 3 of them there, as you can see, but this last one I did there, that wire is just connected to the trace at this point. So let's show you how to do that on the next one that I need to repair. So it's from that next point up on the ROM chip here, but it's at pin 4. You can see the trace is quite badly damaged. You know, there's no connectivity from there to say there. But while there is connectivity at that point on the trace, well, it loses connectivity again by the time you get up to here. Now from there, well, I was just about to say from there the trace is fine, but no, it's actually not. There's another break at that point. But hopefully from that position, yeah, the trace is fine from about there onwards. So we're going to need to run a wire from that corner, say, down to that pin. Now the way I'm going to do this, we'll just strip a little bit of our wrapping wire, line this up to the trace where we need to connect it. I normally try to keep my finger quite close to it so that the wire is definitely sitting flush to the board, but I'll see if I can get it to work with my finger slightly further back, just so you can see it better. But with that held in place like that, we'll put a bit of flux on the area. We'll tin up the iron slightly and see if we can get it stuck down. Right, I think that's it. Yep, that seems pretty good. And we'll just route the wire down to wherever it needs to go, down to that hole. And we'll cut it with plenty of spare length. Strip off the sheath and just stick this bit down through that hole. We'll make that off later. But hopefully now, if we test with the multimeter just against this end of the wire and say up here somewhere, yeah, that's now fine. Once we put the socket in there and solder that wire into place, that will be that trace repaired. So that's what I need to do on basically all of these going up this side. Granted, that is one of the worst ones because that trace in below it there was damaged the whole way back up to here. The rest of these, I think they're just damaged locally. I've finished all the patchwork on the top side of the board. Just before we do any of the patchwork required on the bottom side, I wanted to fit the sockets. Just in the middle of fitting the first one here. Apologies for my voice, by the way. This is now a couple of days later from what you've seen earlier. I have since taken the cold. The dreaded man flu has caught up with me. And yeah, I feel like crap. But I wanted to try and get this finished. I'm eager to know if it'll work. So that is one of the points there where we need to make a repair. That hole there has came away from the trace beside it. But what I just want to try and do to save any more wires, I'm just going to try and bend that leg. And if I can bend that over like that, I'll solder it up at that. Hopefully that will repair the damage. Let's just see. Yeah, that's now fine. So that's what we'll do, just going down this side. Now you can see there where some of the wires are poking through, where we've made repairs from the top side. So in those instances I can just bend, obviously cut that down a bit and then just bend it down. But for the likes of those three there, or sorry, those two there that also need to be repaired, I'll just do the same thing, just bend the leg over. And yes, I'm not sure where my flat snips are, so I'm just using a pair of scissors. I just don't really feel like looking for them at the minute, to be honest with you. My proper side cutters. Well, we've had a problem. As you can see, I've fitted more or less everything now. The last things to fit was the two diodes and a new battery, or battery holder or something anyway. But when going to fit the diodes, remember they were in pretty rough condition. As soon as I put a bit of heat onto them, another one of the pins fell off. It was the diode for position D8, and it was the top pin here. It sits on that pad. It fell off. So I'll just have to go and order replacements for the both of those. At least it might give me a couple of days to get over this cold. Well, it is a few days later. I'm finally starting to get rid of this cold. But what you can also see is that we now have our battery holder in here. But we do also have two diodes. Not surface mounted parts though. These are just through hole parts that I have cut down and fitted in their place. And the reason for that is that I did order the correct parts, and they were supposed to arrive today, but instead I get an email from CPC Farnell to say it'll be probably another fortnight. So I don't want to wait that long. I've just fitted those instead. On the underside, remember these four resistors? In fact, before we look at those, that's where the ground connection of the battery terminal was. Because of all the damage here, it has actually lost that sort of section there. As you can see, it has lost its connectivity to the rest of the ground plane. That's what that slightly heavier wire is doing. That is bringing that connectivity back. But as I was saying, these four components, well, if you remember from earlier, we were able to read out the bottom two components, resistor R109 and resistor R111. The top two components, the bottom one of which is R108, the top one of which I think is R107. Well, we weren't getting any reading on those through the multimeter. So something has failed. But if we have a look at the schematics, and in particular it is the Beaumark schematics. I got these from GitHub, and I will leave a link to this in the video's description. But we can see there R108 and R109. That would be those two components. And the schematic is telling us that both of those should be 100k resistors. Now certainly resistor R109, that reads as 100k, or more or less. R108, we still don't get any reading through that. So bad component, we need to swap that out. The 100k there, that's fine. We know that one is 108, that's meant to be 100k. And this one here, 107, well, that's meant to be 100k as well. So let's fit a couple of new 100k resistors in there. And then I think it will finally be time to try the board. Okay, new resistors are on the bottom side there. Just one last thing to do before we test this. We'll fit a new LED in here. I found this one. Not sure what color it is, but should sit on there nicely, something like that. And I suppose we may as well fit a battery. 50 megahertz crystal. Need that. And believe it or not, a 50 megahertz 5 volt crystal for fitting here is something that seemingly quite hard to find at the minute. So I need to say a massive thank you to Chris Edwards. No doubt anyone in the Amiga scene will be familiar with that name, but he very kindly offered to send me one. In fact, he sent me 4 of them. So let's fit one of those in there. Well, let's test it. Everything is balancing here, but let's see if there's any signs of life. LED came up and we got a pop out of the speaker. We're getting a video signal and just like a grey screen. I found another damage trace on the bottom side of the board. Just here, that bottom trace there. There was a split in it, just where it comes up round that notch in the PCB. So repaired that, and if we try it now, it went chime, and it now comes up with a black screen. If we push reset, you see the screen goes white, it chimes again, and it's stuck on a black screen. In fact, it's more than 2 weeks later at this stage. And yes, despite the time that has lapsed, the 2 diodes that I need for this position here, they still have not arrived. This board has been driving me nuts. I was just about ready to give up on it, and then it randomly showed one very brief sign of life. So yeah, it displayed this screen, and if you can see that floppy disk in the middle with the question mark on it, that would imply that the system booted. So if it did it once, why can it not do it again? Well, it has never done it again for me. I've tested the 4 RAM chips, stuck them into my 486 and ran check it, left it going for, I don't know, an hour or so, and they're fine. Nothing wrong with these. The fact that it did boot that once, well, that suggests to me that there's nothing wrong with the ROM chips. So what could be going on here? Well, if we go back to the image that I took the one time that it booted, you can see vertical lines on the screen. And so chatting with a few guys online who know a lot more about these things than I do, well, the suggestion is these 74F245s. One or several of those might be faulty. So this old PC motherboard, old 486 SX2, this came out of a Packard Bell system, I think, that itself had suffered really bad battery corrosion. This whole area up here was completely wrecked. At the time, I just deemed it beyond saving, so this board, you might have seen before, it was screwed to the wall somewhere just as a display piece, but I just use it for parts. I have actually already taken 3 245s off it in this location to use elsewhere. There are a few more on the board still. There's one there, and there's another 4 in that location. Now, I can't say for any certainty that these work, but I have no reason to suspect they don't. The 3 I took from there, they certainly worked okay. So I'm going to pull these 4 here off, just use hot air to remove them, and then we'll transplant them onto the Mac board and see what happens. Now, despite the fact that this is a scrap board, I'm just going to put a little bit of the high temperature masking tape on there anyway, just in case I ever wanted to recover that plastic RAM socket or that CPU socket. I may as well try to protect them. Right, this board will just go back on the wall for now. And we'll do the same again with the Mac board. Get those 4 off. Although I'm going to use a bit more of this stuff this time, because I definitely don't want to do any damage to this, or well, any more damage. Double layer of tape this time. These were reflowed as well, just in case, you know, it was a bad solder joint on them. There was a little bit of light corrosion on them, so there should be some fresh solder mixed in here with the original stuff. probably a bit of flux as well left on the board here. So I would expect these to come off relatively quickly without any problems. And then we can get these ones stuck down. Just opposite corners first, then we'll just check that the chip is sitting okay. And yeah, it seems to be. So plenty of flux. And we can just do the rest of it. Well, no, it doesn't make any difference. 4 new 245s, or well, 4 recovered 245s, but still just boots to a black screen. Or it did 30 seconds ago. What is going on? It's just that white screen now. And no chime. What is going on here? I put it all together, tested it quickly, just, you know, booted, chime, black screen, that was it. Hit record, turned it on again, and what? One of those 245s faulty? Or something else bad? I don't know. Oh, I am really starting to lose my patience with this. I am that close to giving up. You know, if there was such a thing as like a re-Mac board, you know the way you can get the re-Amiga boards? If there was such a thing as a re-Mac board, you know, a new board, this thing here would be the perfect candidate for it. Because there is something seriously wrong here. See, for one last roll of the dice, I'm going to take it back to the start. Take all this off again. And double check that I haven't missed something obvious. Well, I've been over everything down here and I can't find anything wrong. The ROMs came out, as did the sockets, double checked all the connections, and it's all fine. In fact, I had to redo quite a bit of it, because when taking out this socket, I wound up accidentally removing quite a few of the patch wires I had already fitted. So that's all been redone. You can see I've put the crystal into the board this time. I've removed the socket. It was a bit loose in that socket, but I don't think that in itself would be enough to cause the problems we are seeing. I have now removed the MDU, and I removed this resistor pack, RP14, just to get a look underneath them, just on the off chance that there was something corroded, but no, everything here is fine. I've been right around that with the multimeter in continuity. Everything is grand. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to call it. I'll stick these back on. We'll give it one more try, hopefully even just to see if it chimes and gives us a black screen. But I'm going to have to draw a line under it, because I can't think of anything else. Could it be the ROM chips themselves? Are these bad? Unfortunately, I don't think I can read these mask ROMs out on my TL866, or I certainly can't find a ROM in the settings of the software with the TL866 that is pin compatible to these. I would probably have to build some sort of adapter. But yeah, this one has me stumped. I honestly cannot find anything else wrong. Well, for now, I'm just going to have to draw a line under this because I can't fix it. There was that one brief glimmer of hope when the machine booted, and thankfully I took a photo of it because I've never been able to get it to repeat it. It is still just giving a chime and a black screen. You can push reset. If you hold reset, is the white screen. Let go, it obviously chimes again. We can even push that NMI button and it plays a little jingle. So for now, our Mac IIci is nothing more than a glorified doorbell. But the fact that it did boot once, it did give me that screen with the floppy and the question mark once, that sort of proves that it can be fixed.
I just need to figure out what's wrong with it. I don't think it's going to be the ROMs, because it did boot that one time. Although, I suppose it might be, but I don't think it is. We know it's not the memory, it's not the 245s. There are a few other bits of discrete logic on the board, so maybe something there, but I'm not sure, to be honest with you. I'm wondering, could the real-time clock chip stop this thing from booting? That chip sits just directly above the battery, and it was green with corrosion. So could that have failed? Could that possibly be the issue? One thing I'd like to know, if anybody does know, please let me know, is what could I remove from this board and still get it to boot? You know, are there any components on here that it doesn't need to boot? What's the minimum this needs to even just throw a sad Mac? Because at the minute, something on here is screwing up the data bus, pulling the whole thing down and causing the machine to crash before it can display anything on the screen. So if anyone has any ideas, please let me know. But that is going to be it for now. I have spent more than enough time on this. I do need to step away from it. I will come back to it at some point in the future, because I do want to try and get it working. But for now, that's it. Time to move on to something else, and I'll see you next time.